Morning, morning to everyone. Here we are, first of the month. This year's absolutely flying past, isn't it? So a very warm welcome to this training session, which is going to explore the complaint process and what's required from yourselves and from firms in particular. It's scheduled to run for about 1 hour this morning. So without any further ado, let's get underway then. First off, let's just have a look at what we're going to cover this morning in terms of some of the formal learning objectives. So by the end of the session, we'll have examined what comprises the difference between complaints and everything we need to do to resolve complaints, and when things aren't quite as serious as a complaint, and we can class it as a consideration and do some sort of rapid resolution. We're going to look at the different parties that are involved when a consumer makes a complaint and what their respective roles involve for each of the parties. Then we're going to, again, just go under the bonnet a little bit, look at the complaints handling procedures, what's required of regulated firms, understand the potential outcomes when a complaint is made, which includes, as you know, getting all the way through to the Ombudsman Service. So we'll have a look at the Ombudsman Service in overview and just remind you of the latest compensation limits. They've been tweaked upwards again. So I'm very conscious that for a lot of you on the call that this is probably just a refresher, but that's no bad thing, is it? You know, refresher. And that some of you may be wanting to get on and do required to do the test at the end of the session. So again, I did the test myself earlier this morning, multiple choice questions. I'm confident that we're going to cover everything that you need to be successful in that exam for those of you who need to sit it, more of which later. So that's kind of how the session will run, the areas that we're going to cover and explore together. And just from a contextual point of view, in terms of complaints, as you know that more and more we're living and working in a claims culture, something I think we've probably imported a little bit from over the pond, really, where it's been, a claims culture in America for decades. But more and more consumers are becoming more inclined to make complaints. So what does that actually mean for us in our sector? Well, it means that, unfortunately, every client is potentially somebody who's going to make a complaint against us, irrespective as well of how long they've been a client. And I have got first-hand experience of this from my work with advisors, where some of the firms have been really shocked that a long-standing client has complained and got all the way through to the ombudsman against the firm because they thought they had a real deep, strong relationship with them. And I think that is just symptomatic of people being aware of and wanting to pursue grievances and their right to complain. So with that in mind, every single interaction we have with clients is a potential source of complaint. So we know of all the new responsibilities that we have under consumer duty in terms of making sure clients are updated throughout the process of providing them with the accurate and timely information. And it's also the soft skills we have to increasingly deploy. It's not just our sector. One of my best friends is actually a GP. And he says that increasingly, patients are of this mindset about, looking to make complaints if things aren't going as they think down the right avenue. The majority of complaints upheld by the Ombudsman Service actually relate to the suitability of advice. And I've actually got some of the most up-to-date stats from the Ombudsman Service to share with you later. And that was really surprising to me, given, that we do very comprehensive fact finds, given that we provide suitability letters tailored to the needs and risk appetite of the clients. But nevertheless, you know, the kind of the data, the figures don't lie. And unfortunately, there seems to be an increased activity in the kind of ambulance chasing space. So firms actually making a living by actively encouraging clients to complain about missed sales. And we saw that extensively in the PPI kind of mis-selling debacle. But those ambulance chasing firms are still alive and well. And, you know, they're advertising across social media and other outlets, trying to encourage clients to, you know, no win, no fee type of arrangements. And just in terms of this contextual piece, before we get into some of the meat of it, you know, it's really vital to ascertain when a complaint comes in from a client about, you know, what the absolute essence and core of that complaint is. Because as you know, we are kind of the intermediaries between client and provider. And very often, if the client's got an issue, a grievance, it's more likely maybe to be with the provider. But because we've got the relationship with them, they come to us in the first instance. So I know, again, a lot of my work with advisors, they do get on the end of this where clients are not happy, but not with the firm. It's with something that's not quite right with the provider, be it a missed or incorrect direct debit, or something to do with an administrative error, or, you know, underlying performance and that kind of thing. So vital to ascertain when and if we get a complaint, really get under the bonnet of that. What is the complaint all about? Is it us in the firing line, or is it somebody else? And in what way can we be a conduit, given our duties, our responsibilities under consumer duty, to try and get that resolved for our client? So in terms of who can make a complaint then, well, basically anybody can make a complaint, because it doesn't have to be the client specifically. It could be somebody else coming in on their behalf. So, you know, it could be a family member, could be a friend of theirs. Some clients have even gone to MPs and raised issues with them, and, you know, the MP's letter comes in. Certainly saw that a number of times when I worked for providers. We would got letters in from an MP. I think the client thinking they would get a speedier resolution, a bit more clout behind that complaint. And, you know, a lot of clients like to use the offices of the Citizens Advice Bureau. Maybe they've gone in with a query, and that's resulted in the CAB encouraging them to make a complaint. So, you know, we need to know and be geared up for the fact that, you know, a complaint can come from basically anyone. It doesn't have to be the client. And building on that, it can come in any way these days. I'm old enough to remember when I was first in financial services we used to say to clients, yes, if you want to complain, you will need to put that complaint in writing. Well, those days, as you know, are kind of long gone. Sometimes they do, but more likely that's going to be a telephone call, or it's going to be done via social media. So again, I've still got lots of contacts from my provider days, and they have whole teams across social media to receive complaints that come in via Twitter or Facebook or whatever. So increasingly for the younger generation, their first recourse is to use social media. And again, so what? It means that we just have to be set up to be able to receive complaints through whatever channel a client or one of their representatives chooses to bring that to our attention. So in terms of what is a complaint then, so as you know, it's a very broad brush definition. A complaint is any expression of dissatisfaction which warrants a specific response. So again, we've said very, very broad. Typically, to try and help us, they tend to happen where a complainant thinks that they've had some sort of misleading information, which again is a warning bell, given our responsibilities under consumer duty, or in some way that they've received some poor advice. Maybe they felt that the marketing material was misleading. So I know that's something, again, in the provider space, they're spending an awful lot of time just revisiting some of their marketing materials to make sure they're squeaky clean from a consumer duty point of view. Or if there's been any element of fraud involved, which I think is rarer. And if they feel that in some way, shape or form, something's gone askew with their personal data or confidential information. So we're kind of moving into the GDPR territory there, of which there's been quite a lot in the news lately, haven't they, in terms of leakage of data. So basically, the punchline, I think, is that anybody can make a complaint about just about anything. They can use any channel that they like to raise the nature of the complaint. And it could be for one of a myriad of different things, some of which, as you can see there, kind of outside our control. So what do firms need to have in place? Well, in the first instance, as you know, we must have a complaints handler identified within the firm who understands that's their job, to investigate and to liaise with clients. We are required also to publish complaints policy. I just had a little trawl around on the internet this morning whilst we were waiting for the session to start. And see, these days a lot of firms have actually talked to complaints on their websites and actually got details of their complaints policy, and along with their kind of treating customers fairly responsibilities. So, nice and visible, which was good to see. A client needs to know specifically who's going to deal with any complaints that they have. And I always think this is our industry is such a peculiar industry in many ways, isn't it? What other interaction do you sit your client down right at the start of your interaction with them, before you even put pen to paper, really, with fact finds, and we're actually telling them about their rights to complain and what the channels are. We mentioned the ombudsman service, and we haven't even done any business yet. It's not many professions where that's the case. So the client agreement form is the typical vehicle for specifying who will deal with the complaints, or which is typically the complaints handler that's been appointed. And then the other thing, I guess that's part of the reason you're on the call today, is just to make sure that you're aware of, and everybody within the firm is aware of and understands your approach to complaints, the requirements, and everybody can demonstrate an understanding of that, because anybody at any time, as we've seen, could be on the receiving end of a complaint, and they must know where to go and what to do with it, so as not to exacerbate the situation any further, I would suggest. And as I said at the start, sometimes things might look like a complaint, but we can probably get on and handle it without taking it down the formal complaints process. So not all expressions of dissatisfaction will actually result in us going down that formal process, but that's the judgment call. This is about the complaints handler looking at all the material facts, looking at the situation, exercising judgment and discretion to see if the matter can be resolved. And if it can, that won't be a complaint, that will be a circumstance. And so how would you define a circumstance? A circumstance would be something where it looks like a complaint, but it can be resolved very speedily, no longer than 3 days. So you don't have to put it down the formal complaints channel. Yeah, and these things do crop up in from time to time. They're probably a little bit more frequent than we would like, and it's typically around something minor's gone wrong in the admin part, or it's a service issue which can be easily rectified. And this is, where I've come back to really understanding at the point that initial complaint is made, who needs to get this resolved, because quite often the administrative or service issues are probably things that are outside of your control. It's probably something that a provider has done. I was in an advisor's office last week, and one of the clients was on the phone, and they had taken two amounts of money from the bank account via a direct debit. The provider had, not the advisory firm, and the firm were trying to help them kind of sort that out, which hopefully could be done quite quickly. Sometimes it's just that the clients are a little bit ticked off for whatever reason. They feel a little bit aggrieved, but all they want is for somebody to say sorry. So, it's not always about, reaching for the checkbook and giving compensation. It's just about putting our hands in the air and saying, you know what, you've got a point there. It's not our finest hour. We're so sorry. Yeah. And it's amazing that, issues will just go away. And again, I've known firms resolve complaints and turn them into circumstances with, a well-targeted bunch of flowers, chocolates, whatever it takes, just to really reinforce the fact that, we're sorry, we want to make a full apology. But you might say that, okay, we have caused you some sort of financial loss and inconvenience and stress, and we may well be inclined to put our hands in our pockets and do something outside of a gift and pay more formal compensation. And again, that would prevent it from going down the complaints channel. So whenever we get anything that looks like a complaint, we need to deal with it in a timely way, more of which in a moment. And I guess one of the key objectives for the complaints handlers, people within the firm, is to try wherever possible to prevent them escalating into full and formal complaints. Yeah. Even so, even where we've been able to prevent it going down that formal complaints route, yeah, we should still be always informing our PI provider, just in case things blow up further down the track, so we're not going to leave them kind of blindsided. So whenever you're thinking about complaints, if in doubt, let's make sure that our PI providers have got a good line of sight and visibility. In terms of the FOSS's approach to complaints, well, when they receive a complaint, their first port of call typically is to ask the firm for your client file. And then, because they're ombudsman, they're solicitors, they're objective and independent, they're going to base their assessment solely on the information that's in that client file and on any evidence that is then subsequently provided for them. So this is why, we're always harping on and about the necessity to get everything documented within that client file, so we can give an audit trail. Remember those earlier comments, let's just work on the basis that, if this turned into a complaint at some point down the future, would every I be dotted, every T crossed, so a reasonable person could make a reasonable judgment that we've done everything that we set out to do for the client. So they're going to make this objective assessment, yeah, and the sorts of criteria they'll be looking at is, whether the advice was appropriate for the client. Now, that might sound stupid, because you're thinking, well, why would I give advice that wasn't appropriate? But as you'll see in the figures in a minute, and as I've already said, the majority of complaints coming into FOSS are actually for mis-selling. So, they're finding the majority of cases that, they didn't agree with the advice that's actually been given to the client. So what should be a kind of a no-brainer shoe-in has become a bit of an issue in terms of the FOSS data. The other thing they will go to is they will definitely, obviously the client has approached them, they're quite likely to go back to the client and ask them for any records that they're able to produce over and above that initial kind of claim that they've put in. And also they'll interview them and get their recollections of the kind of their interactions between the firm, the advisor, and themselves. The other things they'll be looking at are the features of the investment. So, you know, if is it appropriately tailored to the client? Have they got features in the investment that they probably don't need or wouldn't necessarily call on? And how is that talked to at all in the suitability report? And obviously, the central piece is going to be the client file. What information is in there? How has it been documented in terms of the evidence, including things like, you know, attitude to risk, capacity for loss, and all that kind of good stuff. And is it all aligned into the advice that's been given? Any information that has been provided about any investments. So, you know, a lot of time people make complaints when, you know, they're a bit aggrieved that maybe their investment hasn't performed, but nevertheless, you know, the advisory firm's done everything by the book, work within the risk profile. And if that's all documented in the file, that's all fine and dandy. You know, it's funny that they never complain when investments are overperforming. So
yeah, not about. I'm just on a training call, so there's going to be some noise in the back.
Okay. And then there's information about what was actually in place at the time. So what were the regs in place at the time? Was it pre or post consumer duty, for instance? What was the actual statute? What was the law that was actually in place at the time? Does that have any material kind of bearing on how they're going to make their conclusion? Yeah. So you'll be asked, as you know, if you've ever had to get involved with this. Hope you haven't, but if you ever have, you have to provide a fairly extensive report for the ombudsman along with the client file. And it's at that point, once again, always send a copy of the report that you've prepared for FOSS off to your PI provider. Again, line of sight, visibility, no surprises is always a good thing, particularly if you're going to need to call on that insurance that you've got in place. So I've said a couple of times that I managed to get some of the latest data, so I thought you might be interested to see that this morning. So the latest data is for Q1 of this year, and there it is in black and white. Look, the kind of top of the pops in terms of the uphold rate, which is 62%, which I thought was quite staggering, really, was for missed sale and suitability of advice. Yeah, and I still, at the moment, metaphorically scratching my head. I just can't kind of get my head round, given everything that we do these days with clients, whilst there's still so much potential kind of mis-selling going on, or at least we haven't covered our backs in terms of the evidence and the audit trail and documentation. And as you can see, that's head and shoulders above everything else. There's still some issues around admin and customer service. I would suggest that's probably more up in the provider land rather than in our space. Some missed sales going on there. Okay, I think that probably relates back to some of those pensions that were mis-sold last year. And there's still some, you know, a third of complaints around charges, fees and commission were upheld as well. Again, I thought that was quite surprising. So it's not just for the IFA sector, this is for the overall kind of population of advisors, but it does include the IFA sector in there. And again, not to do anything with it, but I just thought it would be quite useful for you to see that, because day to day, hopefully, we don't really see complaints. It's not something that's part of our kind of normal day-to-day operations. They're hopefully quite a rare event. And then in the same vein, I just looked at, okay, so what was kind of products that are causing the most issue then? Not surprisingly, I guess that defined benefit transfers were kind of top of the pops, getting on towards 2/3 upheld against that. The one that shocked me there when I looked at it was actually stocks and shares ISAs. Yeah, that could be something that a third of complaints were upheld against, because you thought that's a really straightforward product, that it's a tax efficient wrapper. Why there were so many kind of issues with the stocks and shares ISA, I kind of don't know. Just to answer your question about mortgage advisors' complaints, I didn't see anything specifically picked out in the FOSS. It wasn't something I was specifically looking for, but I didn't see anything. If you go onto the FOSS website and have a little look around, you maybe find something, but nothing that actually jumped out at me. I'm sorry. Okay, so that's what the FOSS have been doing. In terms of the parties involved, this is all really straightforward stuff. Obviously, the complainant is going to be the one who initiates the complaint. That will be against the registered firm, or specifically an advisor within the registered firm, typically. Who else could get involved? Well, we know, we've talked about it a couple of times, and we'll have a look in more detail at the Ombudsman. And then technically it is possible for a complainant to go right the way through to the civil court. So, as you know, whilst all decisions from the Ombudsman are binding on you at firm level, they're not binding on the complainant, and the complainant does have a right to appeal to the civil court. Now that's the law. I don't know any occasions where that's happened, and that's one of my things I ask all the time, because I train this complaints course a lot, and I work with advisors a lot. And so far, we don't know, we can't identify anybody who has gone beyond the Ombudsman. But nevertheless, we just need to know that that is the right of the consumer. And again, just keep banging the drum that every time that we need to be going through this process, let's keep our PI provider fully informed. So in terms of the complaints procedure then, kind of the nuts and bolts of it, as we've already said, the complaint could come in from any kind of source, whether that be written, whether that be verbal, whether it be by social media. Yeah, in comes the complaint. Yeah. And then there's some mandatory steps that we have to follow. So first thing is, we have to, once we've received it, we have to acknowledge it. Then we have to work through some sort of investigation, and then we are required to give a final response to the complainant. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk through each stage of those in a little bit more detail now. So when a complaint is received, the first thing is that immediately needs to get referred to the complaints handler. Yeah, so this is why we say that everybody within the firm, because whoever has actually picked up the phone or is on the end of the social media piece, or it could even be a client come into the office to make the complaint, they must know and understand what the process is and who they need to refer to, who the complaints handler within the firm is that they need to liaise with. So if a complaint is made verbally, and let's face it, these days, that most likely thing is that they're shouting down the telephone at somebody in the office. What must the person who's receiving the complaint actually do? Well, first things first, they've got to make sure that that's all got recorded into the client file, and that needs to be dated, and it should include the following information. Yeah, obviously the date, time, and how long the telephone call lasted. It should also have, and again, I'm aware that you'll have this on file anyway, but just make sure we've captured accurately name, address, and contact number. Bearing in mind, there might have been some changes from what we've got on file. Maybe they've got a new mobile or something like that. What we need to do is to be able to talk to this client and not antagonize them still further if we've got no accurate contact details. So that's critical. And then we basically need to know who the advisor is, who may be involved in this. It does happen. The FCA have said complaints are inevitable. I talk to the advisors I work with about, giving advice being a contact sport. Almost inevitably from time to time, something will happen. So details of the advisor they had the interaction with. And again, drill down, let's get the nature of the complaint. And remember what I've said. Is it a complaint about us? Let's drill down. Is it a provider, third party? Is this something we think we might be able to do through the rapid resolution and treat it as a circumstance? Yeah, that's something that the complaint handler will make a judgment call on. So vital that when a complaint comes in, although it might be quite unpleasant and somebody's been, obviously they're only complaining because they're upset and they might not be in a good headspace themselves, that we keep calm, we make sure that we don't overlook anything and we capture all that information and get it recorded because that is potentially going to be a key piece of evidence as we move forward into the FOS process if we get that far. The other thing we need to do is to get on and acknowledge the fact that we've had a complaint. So the client must be sent an acknowledgement within a reasonable time scale. So again, I've done some more research on what constitutes a reasonable time scale, both at FOS level, and I've been into FCA under the dispute section of the handbook. Unhelpfully, there's no definition of what constitutes a reasonable time scale, although historically it was 5 working days, and most firms would still use this as a standard, an absolute drop dead, I think, although there's no compulsion to do so. My experience is that when firms get complaints, they normally grab them immediately and they're acknowledged on the same day. So normally the complaints handler acknowledges receipt of the complaint as soon as they can, and in written form, the letter outlines what our understanding at firm level is of the nature of the complaint. So it's a chance once again to check out with the client. We think that this is what you are complaining about. If it isn't, or if you've got anything else to add or to retract, this is the time to tell us. Otherwise, we might be looking at the wrong thing or not looking at sufficient. It will also lay out what your complaints procedures are. So you'll have defined your complaints policy, and you'll be able to outline that for them. And it should also specify how and when further contact will be made with the client. And again, my experience, working with firms and also with being client to firms, is timescales in the client's head. This is a big issue. This is a big deal because they've had to make a complaint. So for them, the clock is ticking really slowly, even though you've got 1,001 things to do and it's just something else on your to-do list. And maybe you've some toing and froing between you and providers or other people in the business. So you think you're handling it promptly. For them, the quicker we can get back to them, the more sting potentially we can take out of the situation for them. If after 4 weeks, and this is a formal requirement, if after 4 weeks we've not gotten in a position where we can resolve the situation, then we are required to send out a holding letter, and that's a specific FCA requirement. And basically that holding letter just explains that the complaint's still being investigated, and it tries to give some sort of guidance as to when we think we might be able to come to a final decision on it. And then after 8 weeks or sooner, hopefully, if we've been able to resolve it, we need to send the client a final response letter. Or if in exceptional circumstances, then we're not able to resolve it at the 8-week point, a further holding letter, which once again explains why there's a delay and when the firm expects to complete an investigation. The only time I've ever seen this happen really is when things were outside of a firm's control. They were desperately trying to get hold of information from a provider, and the provider's kind of service was not brilliant, and they were keeping the advisory firm waiting for specific information that they needed from them. So, you know, unfortunately outside of their control, but nevertheless they were having to relay that back to the client, which put them in a very awkward situation. Again, my experience is that most firms want to get these resolved as soon as possible and get to the final response stage. At the 8-week point or earlier, if you've been able to issue the final response letter, the complainant must be provided with a copy of a leaflet informing them of their rights to take the complaint to the Ombudsman Service. Yeah, so that's as you know, that's a mandatory requirement that is required as part of the complaints process. In terms of the investigation, and some of you on the call today may well be fulfilling the role of complaints handler. Well, it's once we've acknowledged that complaint and we've told that the complainant we're looking into it, then the complaints handler basically needs to crack on and do an investigation, which of course, you know, they'll do in a balanced and fair way. And what we're trying to do here is to understand the context of the complaint, what's actually happened, the hard facts, the soft facts, you know, where's the evidence, and make an informed decision as to the validity of the complaint. So the sorts of things that maybe that you would want to consider is, have there been any previous complaints against this particular advisor, either in this specific area or for other areas? How is this comparing to what is being picked up in your file reviews? Is there starting to be the emergence, do you think, of any trends that you might want to be take into account, be cognizant of? Yeah. This is your opportunity to really dig in to the client file, look at the information and evidence within the client file against the nature of the queries and complaints that have been raised by the complainant. And again, really look at that suitability report and satisfy yourself in terms of the level of detail, that how well it's been tailored based on the information. You know, this is your chance to really get stuck in and look at it before maybe it has to go to the FOSS, so that you can come to your final kind of decision and conclusion on it. And then it could go one of two ways, couldn't it? You know, in terms of your final response, having considered it, it could be that, yes, actually, I do find that you've got a legitimate issue, and we're minded to do something about that. Or equally and perfectly legitimately, it could be, actually, having considered all material facts, that I don't think that we've done anything wrong on this occasion, and I'm actually going to specify that in my formal letter to you, that we haven't done anything wrong, and give you the rationale behind why you believe that to be the case. So when we're issuing the final response, as you know, once again, it needs to be done formally in a written letter. And as we've already said, at the same time, we need to ensure that we're giving the complainant that FOSS leaflet that informs them of their rights, details of how to contact the FOSS and the timescales they need to do that within. You can consider a complaint closed when you've issued your final response letter, either way, or if you've decided as part of your deliberations that you want to offer some sort of financial compensation, then the claimant has actually accepted that offer and you've actually paid them, basically. So if you're going down the compensatory route, once payment's been made, you can see that that's happened. As at that point, you can either update the complaints register to record the outcome, and of course that will get squirted up to the FCA in the normal way. If the complainant is dissatisfied with your final response, as you know, we've provided them with the details, they may well want to go to the Ombudsman. Again, always send a copy of your final response and any details if you've decided to pay compensation up to your PI insurers. So in those few cases where maybe they do decide that they want to exercise their rights to go to the Ombudsman, let's have a look at what that might look like then. So as you know, the Ombudsman was created as a result of the Financial Services and Marketing Act. It's a totally independent service manned by solicitors and other legally qualified people and experts in financial services. And their remit really is about dispute resolution. Yeah. So as part of your FCA registration, you've got your authorization, you're automatically covered by the Ombudsman service. And as I've already mentioned, you know, if a complainant accepts the FCA's decision, it becomes legally binding on both parties. But if the claimant doesn't accept, they do have the right of recourse to the court. Either way, you're kind of got to do what the FOS says, not to put too fine a point on it. In terms of the potential compensation that FOS can award, I don't know if you've probably noticed that the rates are actually increased in April of this year. So they've now gone up to £415,000 as a flatline compensatory limit, plus any interest that's been lost that can be demonstrated, proven, plus any costs that have been incurred by the client in terms of getting their case to the Ombudsman, and any interest on the costs incurred. Yeah, so for anything that gets referred now up to the Ombudsman, it's £415,000 for any issues that occurred on or after the 1st of April 2019. And as you can see there, you can see how this has really ramped up, can't you, in terms of the maximum compensation levels. Because for any complaints on issues that happened before 2019, then the headline rate is 190. And I can remember training that at the time, and we all thought that's a lot of money, isn't it? And it's consistently just gone up and up. In terms of who can make a complaint, well, as you know, anybody who is a retail consumer has got a full right to go to FOS. And we kind of drill that into them, as are businesses now. They've been brought into the remit of FOS. There are so-called micro enterprises, so they're very small businesses with less than 10 employees and a turnover or balance sheet of less than €2 million. That's not a typo. That's the law. Harks back to our Brexit membership. And then we've also got small businesses, what I would say they're more like SMEs, so less than 50 employees, turnover a balance sheet of less than 5 million. They can also go, as can charities with an annual income of less than £6.5 million, or a trust with net assets of less than £5 million. They are all regarded as eligible complainants who can take their grievances, shall we say, to the Ombudsman for arbitration. Then, as you know, in terms of time limits, in the leaflet that you provide to your complainant, it does actually specify the time limits. So after your final response letter, they've got 6 months to actually refer their complaint to FOSS. 6 years after the complainant event, they've got as well, or 3 years after the complainant knew they should have known there was a cause to complain. So the complainant event has happened. Then suddenly something's come to light that makes you think, I didn't realise that. I should have complained. PPI would be the best example of that, you know. Good. In terms of further help and support, if you've not found it already, I would recommend that you go onto the BAT system and just look in the document section. There's a couple of really simple, straightforward guides to complaints in the documentation section there, which will only take kind of a 5 or 10 minute read, are well worth doing. And again, if you're tasked with educating the people within your firm, a couple of good documents to help you do that. And again, for those of you who need to do it, there is the test in the T&C section, in the financial exams section. I think there were 20 multi-choice questions from memory. Very confident that we've covered everything in sufficient detail this morning for you to fly through that without any problems whatsoever. Okay, so let's just go back and remind ourselves of what we were looking to do this morning when we set off on this training session. We said we would explore and get to know and understand the difference between complaints and considerations. And then we would take a look at the different parties involved when consumers make complaints and what their respective roles in all of it is. We would understand the complaints handling procedures and what's required of us. It's not an option, well, this is a mandatory requirement of regulated firms, and what the potential outcomes can be when a complaint is made from, you know, we'd find we don't feel we need to offer any compensation, right through to a final response that says hands up, maybe we've done something wrong here. And then finally, we've taken an overview of the financial ombudsman scheme and looked at what their purpose is and this kind of compensatory amounts that they can award to claimants. So good stuff. That completes all the kind of input. As you know now, the training certificates are always issued automatically to IFAC members. So you go onto the BAT system and generate those automatically. Always a good idea to have those in your CPD file. So brilliant. Thanks very much. Enjoyed that session. Always enjoy that particular one. Back on next week, we're going to be looking at the SMF 16 role, which again will be a good session. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. So bye for now.